Okay, so this set of instructional videos will be, as a whole, shorter than the original set. Task 1 just required a lot more time to set the foundation for basic argument analysis for the remaining of the semester. We've learned most of what we need to learn. Now we're just going to wrap some things up, so I just wanted to put that out there. This set of videos picks up on where we left off with isolating premises and conclusions. You know that isolating in premises and conclusions is content principle 1 of clarifying arguments. You should now know what I mean by a clarified argument and an ordinary argument, because to access this video, or in accessing this video, you should have first completed the soft talk module on on clarifying arguments in this class. So as you know, content principle 1 of a clarified version of an argument is to isolate the premises and the conclusion. We already showed our basic argument analysis here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply the other two content principles that you learned about in the second soft talk module, and we are going to apply the 5 formatting principles. So going back to your mandatory notes, we're not going to add very much, very little. We're simply going to add always, so this is, right here, because we might need this space later. Always eliminate excess verbiage in the ordinary argument. Now, you do not delete the text, you do not block out the text, you do not cross out the text. What you do is you draw a line through I'm going to use EV for short, excess verbiage. Okay, so EV stands for excess verbiage. So can you recall the kinds of excess verbiage that you learned about? One was called assuring or certainty. I'll use those words interchangeably. You can add certainty here if you want to. You also learned about something called hedging or doubt. Okay, so assuring, certainty, hedging, doubt. And then you also learned about something called what? Discounting. Discounting is the hardest one for students to understand, so we'll definitely be looking at some examples of that in our arguments. In addition to drawing a line through this kind of excess verbiage in the original arguments, and notice that I said in the ordinary argument, we will add some new ones. So we're going to put as well as premise and conclusion indicator phrases and statements. And I already went through some examples of premise and conclusion indicator, left out a syllable there. Indicators, what's supposed to say. Premise and indicator phrases. I also gave you two examples of what something might look like when the entire statement is a premise or conclusion indicator. Okay, so let me adjust my camera and the paper. There we go. All right. As well as colorful language that is meant only to have a psychological effect. An example of that would be, you are a moron. Okay, stuff like that. As well as any non-statements as well as any statements that are merely contextual. They provide background information about the argument that is in a passage, but none of the statements directly or indirectly play a logical role, strictly speaking, in terms of being something that is the point of some reasons and trying to establish it, or as a reason trying to establish some point. So, as well as any statements that are merely contextual and or irrelevant to supporting the conclusion. I'll put the A conclusion. So these are your mandatory notes. Okay. So at most, we're going to add a little bit more notes here, and then we'll be done with that. Okay, so I am not going to, well, let me put it this way. You can see that I have check marks. Any arguments that we have check marks, we are going to work on those together in the video, or I'll have you pause and then we'll work on them. If you see a K in the video next to an argument, that means that you will simply look at an answer key. So I'll have this document with all of the answers, and you can actually download it and keep it, and or just check the ones that we didn't go over. And I'm doing this to save time. So we're going to maybe do about 6 of the 10 arguments, and the rest you can just look at an answer key to see what the answer was. Okay, so we are going to do this one. Let me do this one with or for you. I want you to just sit back and watch me, see me role modeling the thinking that needs to be done. So as you know, our note said that we have to cross out excess verbiage. When we're doing that, we are talking about the ordinary argument, as your notes say. So here we have, I have come to the conclusion that. That is a conclusion indicator, so our notes tell us to get rid of that. Make sure you get rid of the word that. If you start statement 1 with the word that those who eulogize George Floyd did a good thing, you create a sentence fragment. So a lot of the time, you cannot start with the word that. So when you have a premise or a conclusion indicator, 99% of the time, you want to take out that. You need to draw a line to show me that you are applying content principle 2 from the lesson on clarifying arguments. I want to repeat that. You must use the symbol of a line drawn through some words or a word or a phrase, and sometimes an entire statement, to demonstrate, to visually present the thinking you did in applying content principle 2 of clarifying arguments. Then we've got right here, my reason for thinking this is true is what? Do we want to get rid of that? Yes. So we cross that out. And then we know that what are we supposed to do with non-statements? We also cross them out. Okay, so now we've applied content principle 1 and content principle 2 of clarifying arguments. Now we need to reformat the argument to fully clarify it. By the way, most of your score for any graded work where you analyze and clarify arguments comes from this part, the paragraph part. This will be 70 to 80% of your score. These will be worth a few points, and this will be worth about 20% of your score. So this is the most important part, is the markup, because that's where you show me the actual work, most of the work that you did. Now, when we do the reformatting is where we do the final clarification. When I say a fully clarified argument, I'm talking about it being in the reformatted version, not in paragraph form. Okay, paragraph form, when you take this all out, then it's less clear. Formatting can make it more clear in terms of how we're defining clarified argument. All right, so the other thing, the last thing that we're going to add to our notes with respect to this week's lessons is always reformat the argument, and we're going to apply the third content principle that you learned about in clarifying arguments, and apply, well, we'll just say, and employ uniform language. You might want to put a note up here that this goes with the second soft talk module that you did during this week's, or not the second, but the soft talk module on clarified arguments. So all of this is coming from the soft talk module lessons. Always reformat the argument and employ uniform language, okay? Make sure you apply all of the formatting principles. There's about 5 if you want. What I recommend is go into the lesson, which you should have downloaded and printed, and write down all of the principles. You might also, what you could also do is watch me apply the formatting principles and then just add them here as we work through the arguments. I'm not going to do that because you have reference to them in the lessons that you took. So I'll leave it up to you if during the videos you want to write them down here in your notes, but you should have them in the lesson that you downloaded from the soft talk module. Do I want to say anything else yet? Oh yeah. Do this exactly as demonstrated by Dr. C, by the professor. Okay, and so that's pretty much, this pretty much concludes 90% of your master document. This entire thing here is a tool that you use throughout the semester, the entire thing. So you've got what you need for the rest of the semester. This is your toolkit. Always refer to this when doing argument analysis. Okay, so that said, now we're going to go ahead and do the reformat. Something that is very important that you might want to put in your notes. Remember I told you you could do optional notes with warnings and tips. And that is that if you eliminated something here in your ordinary argument, it should not show up in the reformatted version. If you labeled statement 2 as a premise here, you should label it as a premise here. Whatever is labeled as a conclusion here should be labeled as a conclusion here. The soft talk module shows that, but I'm iterating that because sometimes people give me a reformatted version of the ordinary argument, and the reformatted version does not align with what is in here. So that's very important. Okay, so as you know, when we're reformatting an argument, we have to isolate each statement, and we include only the statements that are playing a role in the argument. As you also know, each statement gets its own line. You also know that the reformat always starts with a premise, never a conclusion, and always ends with some kind of conclusion, never a premise. That would be a great warning to put in there, but I'm also giving you the formatting principles. So as you also know, when we are reformatting the argument, we label it. In the soft talk module, it might have told you to write down the word premise, or that's what it might have had, but we're going to use P for short. Then you should use the colon mark. Then you copy the premise. If you go in here, it said he with a little h. So something that is very important when you're reformatting is to use proper writing mechanics and conventions. Since this is the beginning of a sentence, the beginning of a statement, it starts here, not here. That's just a label. The beginning of the sentence / statement starts here. We want to capitalize the first letter. So it says, he was unjustly killed. All right. Then we want to, I should have numbered it, premise 1. So you label the premises with a P, and then you're going to number the premises. So then the conclusion goes on a new line. So then you do a C. Remember, we do not number conclusions ever. Write that down in your formatting. If you're writing down the formatting principles, isolate each statement, label the premises and the conclusion with a P or C, number all and any premises, never ever number the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion was, those who eulogized George Floyd did a good thing. Those who eulogized George Floyd did a good thing. All right, so have we finished applying everything from our notes? No, we have not applied content principle 3. I should not have had that there. What should go right there? Who are they talking about? Imagine that somebody's making the argument and they just all of a sudden say, hey man, he was unjustly killed. you don't know who they're talking about. So one way that we make this more clear in this version of the argument is we replace he with what? George Floyd. So what you need to do is, if you're using pencil, you can erase this, or you can just do a little arrow up and write George Floyd was unjustly killed. So write, and then those who eulogize George Floyd. Did I do something? Those who eulogize George Floyd did a good thing. But yeah, I had not applied content principle 3. But I did that on purpose to show you a mistake. Did you make that mistake? Learn from it. So George Floyd should go right here. Remember, the definition of a clarified argument is to make the logical features, the core logical features of an argument transparent. Super obvious. So obvious. There's nothing wrong with this. This is beautifully constructed. I love it. This is how I like you to construct your arguments in paragraph form. But that's not what we're concerned with when we're clarifying an argument. We're trying to boil this down to its core logical essential features. All right, do you see how the information here completely aligns with the information here? Although the conclusion comes first in the ordinary argument, formatting tells us to put a conclusion last when reformatting it. Although the premise comes second in this ordinary argument, formatting conventions tell us that we start with premises. Even though the premise is statement number 2 in the ordinary argument, formatting conventions tell us to start with the number 1 for a given premise. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do this argument. If you'd like to know the answer for this argument, you will have to look at the answer key that you can download after submitting your evidence of engagement. So again, I'm going to have this document pop up only after you submit evidence of engagement with these lessons. All right, so at this point, things are going to move a little bit more quickly and fluidly. From now on, I'm not going to write this out in front of you. Rather, I'm going to ask you to pause the video before I do this part, and then it's just going to appear. So you'll see what I'm talking about, but it will be a little bit more, we'll move more quickly, more fluidly. What we are going to still do together is cross out excess verbiage. So let's go ahead and do that. So no way, we didn't bracket it. So the idea is, if you didn't bracket or number something, it's going to get crossed out, because whatever you whatever's not bracketed or numbered is not a statement. So it should definitely be crossed out per our notes. So we got rid of no way. We're leaving all this because we're treating this argument as an appeal to a reliable authority. So part of the argument is that they appeal to a reliable authority to get that definition. For this reason, we're getting rid of that conclusion indicator. It's saying we already gave you the reason. Here comes my conclusion. What are the other obvious ones? Are you some kind of idiot? Okay, so that's a question, but it's also one of those psychological rhetorical elements. Now, different from the last one, we are going to cross out statements. In here, we did not cross out any more statements. But in here, we are going to cross out statements. Never cross out a statement that is labeled as a premise or a conclusion. Some students do that, and I'm not sure why. You might want to put that in your warnings and tips page. Never cross out, or I shouldn't say cross out. Never draw a line through. Whenever I say cross out, think draw a line through. Never draw a line through something that has been labeled as a premise or a conclusion. If it's a premise or a conclusion, it's playing a role, and therefore you shouldn't say it's not playing a role by drawing a line through it. If you label something as a premise or conclusion, you're contradicting your own thinking and work, and you don't show a clear understanding of the lessons if you then draw a line through it to say it's not important. Okay, so notice what it says here. Only a moron would think that. That's a conclusion. I mean, that's a statement, but it gets crossed out because it's excess verbiage. By calling someone a moron, they're trying to get to their feelings, their sense of self-worth, to get them to accept their conclusion. But that's not the way logic and argument works from the standpoint of philosophy. We don't appeal to people's insecurities and feelings and sense of self-worth by using a psychological trick of calling them a moron to accept the conclusion. This has nothing to do with whether or not some conclusion is plausible or true. You see so much of this in social media, though, but it's utter bullshit. Sorry, I had to say that. I have very strong feelings about that. Okay. How are we done? No, there is some excess verbiage in statement 2. The clue is that it's not a lot. It is in the form of hedging. It's a word that expresses doubt in their own belief. What is it? Think, right? So in the conclusion, we would have, I do not think it was right. So then you have to change the sentence a little bit. So this is very important. You might want to write this down in your mandatory notes or your warnings. That sometimes you have to fix the syntax of a statement when you get rid of excess verbiage. Not all the time, not most of the time, but some of the time. Often when you say, I do not think, and you have the word not, you do have to do that. So they're basically saying it was not right to eulogize George Floyd. So that's what we could do. So we could cross this out, everything but the not, because we still need the not in there. Then we can have it was not, right? Do you see how I'm bringing this not to over here? Right to eulogize George Floyd. That allowed me to get rid of this hedging here, excess verbiage. All right, so what is the answer? I'm going to show you in an instant. I'm going to pause this video. And then when it resumes in 3 seconds, you're going to see the final answer for the formatting. Okay, so how does your answer compare with mine? According to vocabulary.com, eulogizing refers to the act of talking about how much you respect and admire someone. That's an R. Notice that I changed the word them to someone, because them makes it seem like you've already referred to a person that you're talking about or whatnot. So them isn't the best way to have that in there, so I changed it to someone. When you're clarifying arguments, remember you're using objective analytical skills. You don't want to distort someone's argument, but you can do a minor tweak, a minor tweak like that. One word to fix syntax or create correct word usage. You can do that. You don't say George Floyd here, because this is about a definition that can be applied to anybody, or to the act of eulogizing anyone. So I put someone. There wasn't any room for employing uniform language. So you're not always going to have to apply all of the content principles. It's going to depend on the ordinary argument itself. You will see that we did follow through with changing the beginning of the syntax here. Instead of saying, I do not think it was right, we said it was not right to do so. So pay attention to that. Make sure that when you're reformatting that you have a clear, good, crisp formatting space. So you can see P1 is directly over conclusion, and then each line starts at about the same mark right here. It's indented all in a nice line. If you put it way over here, the rest of the sentence, it looks like a paragraph again. So for this one, you could look at the final answer in the answer key.